I'm going to invite our panelists to join us up here on the stage, and I also wanted to just mention how lucky we are in Rhode Island. We really have a state-level commitment to mitigating hate and bias. Where is Dr. Jody Glass? I saw her on the way in. Dr. Jody Glass is a blessing and coordinates our Rhode Island Commission on Prejudice and Bias, which is a really important part of our state, and I think it's essential for all of us to know that. I also want to thank the representatives from our congressional and statewide leadership who join us today. Nisa Villarreal from Senator Whitehouse's office, Christopher Albert from Senator Reed's office, and representatives from law enforcement from across the state. We're grateful for your support and thank you for being here. And so as our panelists join us, I will also remind you on each table there are cards, and we invite you to write your questions on those cards. And who's collecting those? Okay, those who are collecting the cards will raise their hands. You may submit your questions, which will then be shared with our panel. So it's my pleasure to introduce our panelists, Robert Preston, who we just heard from, as well as Jim Vincent, the president of the NAACP Providence Branch, Victoria Strang, the director of the Rhode Island Interfaith Coalition to Reduce Poverty, my colleague, Rabbi Mark Alpert, the rabbi of Temple Beth-El in Fall River. So with that, I will hand Phil Isle, a freelance journalist who will moderate our panel. Thank you.
So my name is Phil Isle. I see some familiar faces in the audience, including my mom. Hi, Mom. I'm a freelance journalist based here in Providence, my hometown. Some of you may know me as the former editor and the last editor of the Providence Phoenix. I've also written for the former Jewish Voice, now Jewish Rhode Island, the Forward, and elsewhere, and I teach at a few local colleges. I want to start, I'm going to be very brief in my intro. I just want to start with a few thank yous. First, thank you all for coming out this evening. I want to thank the Alliance and the ADL for organizing the event, and the JCC for hosting the event. And of course, I want to thank the panelists for taking the time to participate and share their insights this evening, and to Robert for that introduction. Robert, I think, and Rabbi Matt covered a lot of the important bases. I'm not going to intro this too much except to say I'm in the news business, and I was just scanning the headlines just from the last 5 weeks. And this is by no means an exhaustive sample, but here are a few things I found. Kind of a snapshot of where we are in this country and in the world today. The New York Times, April 27th, 1 dead in synagogue shooting near San Diego. Officials call it hate crime. The Atlantic, May 3rd, anti-Semitism is thriving in America. USA Today, May 18th, 3 arsons at 2 Jewish centers in 1 week, rattles Boston suburbs. The Forward, May 23rd, 1 day, 4 cities, 4 swastikas. The New York Times, May 26th, an editorial, the old scourge of anti-Semitism rises anew in Europe. NPR, May 28th, German government officials recommend Jews exercise caution when wearing a kippah. This is just a tiny sample of what's going on right now, and I did want to mention in the ADL's audit of anti-Semitic incidents from 2018 last year, they remarked that the ADL has tracked anti-Semitic incidents for the past 4 decades, and in 2018 recorded the 3rd highest number of incidents. And that, of course, included that deadly synagogue attack in Pittsburgh, which was the deadliest attack on Jews in the history of the US. So this is where we are right now, and clearly and unfortunately this remains a pressing, one could even say a life and death issue, that's well worth discussing at events like this, and certainly going forward. And as I see it, the aim of this discussion tonight is twofold. I would like folks first to walk away with a clear understanding of anti-Semitism in the past and in the present, and what that is. And 2, I definitely want folks to walk away feeling empowered to act, to help be a force against anti-Semitism. So hopefully you're going to walk away with some actual tangible ideas about what you can do in your community, in your city, in your state, in your country. I think we're going to have about 45 minutes to talk from the panel, and then we'll have about 15 minutes for questions. The system, as you've been hopefully told, is those cards on your table are for questions. If you have a question, write them down, hand them to one of the helpful folks around the room, and I will be able to read some of those at the end. The Post-its, I'm told, are for you to give suggestions, questions, comments, concerns about future programming. Tonight is not the final word in the community on this issue. We certainly want to hear ideas about things that haven't been addressed or that you're concerned about, or suggestions for what could be done going forward. And if we don't get to your question or your concern tonight, Stephanie has told me I can say this. You can email Stephanie Haig at shaig@jewishallianceri.org. She's the Alliance's Director of Community Relations. If all else fails, email Stephanie. So I wanted to just begin by giving each of our panelists a moment to say a few words, to introduce themselves, and to talk about their own work a bit and their experience with hatred in their communities. And if they wanted to offer any initial thoughts about the subject of the evening, by all means. We can start wherever you want. Maybe Victoria, you want to kick us off?
All right. Good evening, everyone. Can you all hear me? My name is Victoria Strang. I am the director and lead organizer of the Rhode Island Interfaith Coalition to Reduce Poverty. Our name is long, but it is very descriptive of exactly what we do. We are a group of faith leaders, congregation members, direct service providers, and advocates from across the state who come together to work on poverty reduction by educating and engaging people on policy issues. So some of the issues that we work on are affordable housing, increasing access to affordable health care, raising the minimum wage, ensuring fair and equal pay, early childhood education, and many, many more things. I'm very pleased to be here tonight. Our offices are actually located in the Jewish Alliance, and we have a number of wonderful Jewish leaders who are here, including Rabbi Sarah Mack, Rabbi Jeff Goldwasser, and Rabbi Howard Boss Altman, who are all part of our committee and work with us every day to educate the community and get people out and empowered around these issues. I think one of the reasons that I've been invited here to speak with you tonight is because our organization is one of the few interfaith groups that works in the state. So each day we work together and come together as a group of people from different faith communities, whether they're Muslim, Jewish, Christian, Buddhist, many different traditions, to be unified around issues that we can all agree on. And that's really that people should not live in poverty. And I think one of the messages that I really want people to leave here with today is that we can't always be discouraged. We really need to come together in all times, not just bad times, not just after a traumatic event has happened, but in times that may seem stable or in times that may seem like things are going well for us in our communities. We need to build strong relationships with our neighbors and community members, build authentic, solidarity-based relationships so that these kinds of attacks aren't the only time that we're seeing people come together. It's really important that we find these common threads, whatever they may be, so that we can stop acts of hatred and help educate ourselves and our children and our communities about the differences that we may have, but also the similarities that bring us together. So that, I think, is what I have to say for tonight. I'm here to answer questions about those things as well as interfaith work being done in the state. And I want to thank the Jewish Alliance and Stephanie again for having me.
So we're going to skip over Robert because he's had some words and go straight to Jim. No offense, Robert.
Well, first of all, good evening, everyone. I'm so happy to be here. I see a lot of familiar faces, and I just want to thank the organizers for inviting me and having a different voice, perhaps, in this discussion of the despicable anti-Semitism that is happening in this country and what I see as a daily occurrence. For those who don't know, the NAACP is the largest and oldest civil rights organization in America. We were founded in 1909. We were founded here in Providence in 1913. And our mission, and I want to make sure I get it right, is to secure the political, educational, social, and economic equality of rights in order to eliminate race-based discrimination and to ensure the health and well-being of all persons. So we work with everyone. I think there's some misconceptions in terms of who we are and who we represent. I'm going to name some names. Henry Moskowitz, Jacob Schiff, Jacob Bilikoff, Rabbi Stephen Wise, Joel Spingarn. What I just did was name 4 of our founders in 1909. Okay, so the NAACP has always had a connection with the Jewish community. It always has and it always will. And so when I see anti-Semitic events, it hurts me because I know that when people target the other, I know that they're targeting me as well. I don't care if it's Charlottesville, Pittsburgh, or New Zealand. Anti-Semitism, racism, bigotry affects all of us. And we live in a climate today where it's being normalized. I mean, I think now even the people that might doubt that have to agree. We're living in a climate, especially over the last 2 years, to be very specific about it, that has basically normalized hatred and bigotry. And, you know, we have a system going on now where division is being rewarded, you know, and coming out and saying what you believe is supposed to be a good thing. Well, it's not a good thing if you're spouting hatred and bigotry and anti-Semitic remarks. It's not a good thing when you say that Hitler was right on a gravestone in America in 2019 or 2018. You know, we have come too far to go back to anything resembling what both our histories have gone through. Be it the black community with slavery, or the Jewish community with the Holocaust. We have come too far together. And I know I have been here in this building a number of times because there have been some issues here in Rhode Island that have affected both our communities. So I am proud to work with Adam, who's your director here, on whatever issues of the day that come across. I've been at vigils when there have been anti-Semitic incidents in this area, and I will continue to do that because I know that when they target Jews, they're targeting me. And when they target me, they're targeting you because they're targeting the other. This whole thing about we want our country back from them. Well, who are the them? We know who the them are, okay? And it's just not likely. So we have to stick together. We have to work together because hatred will never defeat love and unity. It never has and never will. It never will. So I'm proud to be on this stage with these great individuals that are with us and all of you who are great people. Because hopefully we'll come closer together and work harder to make sure that hatred and bigotry and anti-Semitism is never normalized in the United States of America. I don't care how hard they try, they can't win. It's impossible. So, you know, even though there's some reasons to be pessimistic, there's certainly reasons to be optimistic in our unification. So our organization, NAACP, has always been an organization that has preached that anti-Semitism has no place anywhere. I named some of our founders. We've always had people on the board that were of Jewish ancestry or Jewish faith to this day. So there's no separation. We are you and you are us. And I'm proud of that, and I thank you.
Okay. I'm going to read what I wrote. I'm not going to do it off the cuff. As you've heard, I'm the rabbi in Fall River, Massachusetts, who says, as I'm sure you all know, back in March, experienced the desecration of one of its Jewish cemeteries. I'm sure that's why I was asked to be on this panel. However, my experience with anti-Semitism is lifelong. I'm the child of Holocaust survivors from Poland, and the vast majority of my family was wiped out during World War II. The parts of my family that did survive either went to the land of Israel in the 1920s and 1930s, or came there shortly after the establishment of the state. My family's social circle was comprised of other Polish Jewish survivors and their children. No one my age had grandparents. Though I grew up in New York City, which has the largest concentration of Jews outside of Israel, I experienced quite a bit of anti-Semitism in the neighborhood I grew up in Queens, and in Manhattan also. Anti-Semitism has been around over 2,000 years. A classic expression of it appears already in the book of Esther in the Bible, which was probably written around 400 to 300 BCE. I'm sure a lot of you are familiar with it. Haman says to King Ahasuerus, "There is a certain people scattered and dispersed among the other peoples in all the provinces of your realm, whose laws are different from those of any other people. It is not in your majesty's interest to tolerate them. Let an edict be drawn for their destruction." Of course, over the centuries, it hasn't mattered whether Jews attempted to assimilate and give up their different laws or not in terms of anti-Semitism persisting. Even the state of Israel, which fulfilled the 2,000-year-old dream of re-establishing Jewish sovereignty in our ancient homeland in the hope of saving us from anti-Semitism, has experienced anti-Jewish prejudice on a global scale. This is no time to mince words. As I said earlier, back in March, one of the Jewish cemeteries in Fall River was vandalized. You saw the pictures, or some of the pictures, with headstones toppled and anti-Semitic slurs, swastikas, and foul language written on close to 60 tombstones. The extent of the vandalism and the vileness of the language came as a shock to the Jewish community. But with the escalation of public expressions of hatred and bigotry over the last couple of years, I can't say it was a complete surprise. It's not as though crimes of this nature or feelings of bias are new, but more accurately, as others have said, it seems that people feel freer to express these kinds of sentiments in our current divisive atmosphere. Those feelings and the groups of people who harbor them have been somewhat more underground in the past. Social media such as Facebook and the internet itself have provided a platform for prejudiced people and a means for them to more easily find each other. However, at the same time, it provides people of goodwill a means to find each other too. After the acts of vandalism in March, I was inundated with expressions of sympathy, caring, and requests to do something to help and to show support from many people locally as well as around the country. That is the larger message, I believe. As disturbing as it is to witness the increasing number of expressions of intolerance and bigotry, including violence and murder, it's truly heartening to see that so many people from all different backgrounds and faith traditions reject and oppose those negative, destructive sentiments and believe in the foundational principles in our country, that all men and women are created equal and that they are endowed by their Creator with certain inalienable rights, that among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. Such powerful words to live by. Even when we as a nation fall short of those ideals, we still retain them as our true north by which to orient ourselves. Our strength lies in our common bonds and ideals. It lies in our recognition that the quality of our city, our state, and our nation resides in our mutual support and respect. It also lies in our tolerance and acceptance of different cultures and beliefs, each of which contributes to the greater good of our nation as a whole. As Walt Whitman, generally recognized as our nation's greatest poet, put it, "Whoever degrades another degrades me, and whatever is done or said returns at last to me. I speak the password primeval. I give the sign of democracy. By God, I will accept nothing which all cannot have their counterpart of on the same terms." Those who desecrated the Jewish cemetery in Fall River wanted to make us feel isolated and vulnerable. They wanted to breed fear, divisiveness, and hatred. But the response from the greater community offering solidarity, support, and sympathy meant an enormous amount and only emphasized that the perpetrators are still a marginal minority. The quality of life in any area is dependent on all of its members working together to build a strong and cohesive community. This is no time to be indifferent, passive, or neutral. We need to stand together. I keep returning to the words of Elie Wiesel, the Nobel Peace Prize winner and survivor of Auschwitz, who said, "Neutrality helps the oppressor, never the victims. Silence encourages the tormentor, never the tormented. When one segment of our population is threatened, we all are. Our strength lies in our common bonds and ideals." Thank you.
Thank you all for such eloquent introductions. I wanted to start out really starting with the basics. I'm a teacher and I like to make sure everybody's on the same page to begin with. And in this case, I thought that would be starting with definitions. Merriam-Webster defines anti-Semitism as hostility toward or discrimination against Jews as a religious, ethnic, or racial group. In its online resources about anti-Semitism, the ADL describes anti-Semitism as the belief or behavior hostile toward Jews just because they are Jewish. It may take the form of religious teachings that proclaim the inferiority of Jews, for instance, or political efforts to isolate, oppress, and otherwise injure them. It may also include prejudiced and stereotyped views about Jews. This is perhaps a question for Robert, but really anyone can jump in. How well do you think people in this country, in this community, within and outside of the Jewish community, understand that definition? How are we all as a country on the same page about what anti-Semitism even is, and can you tell me where we might be misunderstanding each other?
Well, I think the short answer is no. I think that there's a large segment of, there's a segment of the population that harbors anti-Semitic views and beliefs, without question. And I think there's a lot of people that do not understand what anti-Semitism is. And there are people who grew up hearing what we would say as what we would identify as a stereotype or a trope about Jews or the Jewish community. There are many people who grew up as that was fact in their house. They learned it as facts as a child. They don't even see it as a stereotype. They actually see it as the truth. I'll give you a quick example. Just the belief that the Jews are responsible for the death of Christ, right? And that's actually a recent thing, in the last few decades, that the Catholic Church, through Nostra Aetate, has made a change. But there are still many people of the Christian faith who believe it. And even, for instance, in South and Central America, in many churches in the last couple of decades, it was still taught. And many people have moved to the United States with that actual belief and have passed it on to their children. So a number of organizations in the Jewish community have identified as working with people in the Latino community to provide some educational, working with archdioceses and Catholics to work on this. So I don't think there is a common. I would say I don't think there's a common understanding. I think this is one of our challenges.
I would just add that when I hear that question, I would think that the people who are bigoted and the haters, let's call them, they're not concerned about definitions. Right. They're not thinking intellectually about this. They're acting viscerally on a hatred that's been cultivated for them over their lives.
Rabbi Alpert, I wanted to actually stick with you. You touched on the events at the cemetery in Fall River in your opening remarks. And I just wanted to give you a chance to add anything. Was there anything, being on the ground for the aftermath of that incident, that you took away from that you would want to share with the group here tonight?
A few things. One, I think the whole community was shocked by what happened, but not totally surprised because of the atmosphere in the last couple of years in this country. But at the same time, what I did take away was the incredible, how heartened I was by the incredible response of the larger community, how much people reached out and really wanted to express their solidarity and support. You know, so many people offered their help in cleaning the tombstones. I mean, there was such an outreach that made a huge difference. It made us feel much less alone, as I said in my prepared remarks, that the perpetrators, I believe, want us to feel isolated and frightened. But in fact, what happened was the community showed us that they cared, and we had about 700 people who showed up at the vigil that week. So it was an enormous outpouring of support.
A few of my questions that I prepared for the evening strike me as more sensitive and delicate than the others, perhaps slightly more volatile, and I could steer away from those or I could just go straight for them. And I think we're here to have a frank conversation. And the first one of those questions is, for anyone, I think what a lot of folks are wondering or have strong ideas about is, why this uptick in global and national and local anti-Semitism and hatred of various kinds? Why do you think this is happening now in 2019 and in the years leading up to this? Do you have any thoughts about that?
I do. That's an easy one. There's a feeling of culture being changed forever, I think in America and in Europe, by the other. And I think the way it plays out, you have certain groups of people, some people call them white supremacists, some people call them white nationalists. They feel threatened. They feel that the way of life, the culture, American culture or European culture in the case of overseas, is being threatened by the other, and we know who those other people are. So we're almost at a Waterloo because in America there's an increase of people of color, for example, that places tension in terms of some of the feelings by people that might not exactly have a easy life. I mean, people are struggling across the board in America in general, and I think what happens when people are struggling, they tend to look for scapegoats. They tend to want to blame somebody, and they look to their leaders for who they should blame. And so the leaders have a responsibility, I think, to bring people together, because it's a dangerous mix when people are frustrated by economic conditions, be it global or national, and they're not quite sure why they're not living the kind of lives maybe their parents and grandparents have lived. And we grew up in American culture thinking you're going to do better than your parents. So when things don't go that way, you're confused, you're looking for leadership. And when that leadership basically plays into divisiveness and blaming the other and scapegoating, it's a combustible mix. So I see, a leadership in this country that says, for political expediency and political gain, let's play on the division and hatred of people. Let's say, well, I'm here to protect you from them. You can't trust them. So they're going to change our way of life if they get in control. So we got to put a stop to it. So white supremacy is real, it's deep, and the reason why at the Muslim Vigil, I guess it was a couple months ago, I said it's the biggest threat to the country and if not the world, is because people die, people get hurt, people get maimed, okay? I believe that global warming is an important issue, and I believe that housing is an important issue, but is it more important than the rise of white supremacy and white nationalism, where people die? No, I don't think so. I'm more concerned about those issues where people die because of who they are. Just simply being Jewish, just simply being black. They want you dead because they gotta blame somebody for their inadequacies or for global conditions or whatever. So you see it here, you see it in Europe, you see it in New Zealand even. And I think this rise of white supremacy and white nationalism that's being stoked by demagogues that are at the top of our society here in America, dividing us, making us suspicious of each other, goes a long way to explaining why it's being normalized to hate Jews the way it was, not since my childhood. I'm going to my 50th high school reunion next month. I've never seen it like this. And I grew up in Boston, so I saw anti-Semitism in my high school in the 60s. But it wasn't like this. No, I think it's worse now than it was then. So I think we gotta be alert. I think we're living in some dangerous times. So forums like this are not only timely, but they are critical. Pay attention.
Victoria?
I think another point to bring up, which really resonates with what Jim is saying, is there's also what I've noticed not only in my work in religious communities, but in academia, is that there is a real lack of understanding and education about religion and religious communities. I think in the United States, especially on the coasts, we have a growing understanding and appreciation for secularism, which kind of otherizes and maybe makes people of faith deemed somewhat ignorant. And I think that's actually really detrimental to faith communities and people of faith, because it's continuing the stereotypes that we have if we're not actually educating people about what different religions believe, what people experience in their daily life. And it's been interesting for me working with different communities here, because I have seen a lot of effort from different religious communities, most recently the Muslim community, who is celebrating Ramadan right now, really trying to demystify Ramadan. So there's a lot of Facebook posts and a lot of social media saying, this is why we celebrate Ramadan, this is why we are fasting, this is what we believe. And I think as we may pride ourselves, especially on the East Coast, of being very well educated, a lot of times we are not making space for people to learn about different faith traditions and what that means. On a more personal note, half of my family is actually from New Zealand. I'm a dual citizen there. And a number of my family members, including my youngest niece, was actually in Christchurch, very close to the mosque shootings. And one of the things that I have talked to my niece and some of my other family members a lot about is New Zealand is a very secularized society. And they really a lot of my family members in particular, had not become familiar with what Islam was, what Muslims believed. And this was their first kind of interaction with that community. And to me, that is not a good situation. We need to come together so that we're really educating each other, so that we can't allow the stereotypes that Robert mentioned to occur. We need to open up our houses of worship. We need to open up and have our children understand what other people believe. And I'm really happy that in Rhode Island we actually have several programs that do that. I know that there's a partnership between the Islamic Day School and the Jewish Day School here, where students go back and forth to the different schools to meet each other, to build relationships, to learn about each other's faith and culture. And I think those are more of the programs that we do need to foster, so that we're not allowing this mainstream of hatred to kind of dominate the narrative in our society.
I would just add a couple of things that I think that the things that Jim mentioned, I think that a lot of these issues affect each other. For example, climate change affects things economically to a great degree. It's creating a situation where there are more droughts, and there are more incidents that affect the economic conditions and affect the refugee situation around the world. And I think another thing that, these are just a few incidental points, the United States government defunding the organizations that try to combat terrorism within this country, rather than where they can, external terrorism coming to this country. They've defunded that to a very large degree, and that I think also affects how things can fester, because, as Victoria was saying, the education, the money is not being put into education. Money is not being put in where there was funding, more funding in the past. They've taken away that funding. So I think that it's all of the issues are interrelated, and so we have to, in a way, I mean, it can be exhausting, but we have to be vigilant about all of them, because they affect each other.
Really quick, technology is one of the contributing factors to all of this. It's a contributing factor to, I think, everything that everyone has said, because this didn't exist in this way 5 years ago, 10 years ago. I mean, most of the kids in middle school today, they don't even know what a flip phone is, okay? And they, kids who are 12, 10, 11, 12, they have access to the exact same information, images, language that you do. So when they see a leader not saying, using a Holocaust analogy or degrading or dehumanizing people of color or immigrants, they actually have almost no context to even understand it. Like they haven't even, at that point, they don't even understand the history of the civil rights movement in this country and what led to it. So there are a lot of people who are getting lots of information and images, and so I actually think that's one of the reasons why we're seeing so much of hate and bigotry happening in schools. And really on education, if we want to see a different country in 5 years, 10 years, 15 years, we better start working with the kids in middle school and high school now, because that's the future. Frankly, it's too late by the time people are in college and university. We have to focus on those kids now.
Robert, I want to stick with you for a moment. The numbers that you see in the ADL audit from last year and the examples that you cited in your introduction tonight, it's certainly sobering stuff, it's scary stuff, it's disturbing stuff. I know that you've said you're fired up and you want other people to be fired up. I'm interested in going off of what that official said in Germany, recently, advising Jews not to wear a kippah or a skull cap in certain parts of the country. What do you say to Americans, Rhode Islanders, about an appropriate level of fear right now, or vigilance? I mean, you've talked about fired up. I guess I'm more curious in how worried should people be, do you think?
Well, I think we need to be vigilant. And I think it was the chief rabbi in Germany who actually, or some chief Jewish official who made that comment that, advising Jews in Germany not to wear a kippah. And then, this thing happens in Peabody where a rabbi and his wife are walking to shul on a Saturday and, a pickup truck happens, pulls up. And, I think in this country, Jews probably have been insulated against that kind of just sort of random attack. And I think probably people of color have experienced it a lot more than we have, because most of us are white and most of us don't, you can't tell that we're Jewish when we're walking on the street. So, but I do think we need to be vigilant, but I don't think we should be intimidated. And I don't think we should stop being Jewish, and I think we should be proud of who we are. And we need to be vigilant, and that means that we need to have a police officer in uniform at the door. And frankly, if somebody wants to, no security official will ever tell you that security is 100%. But we need to be vigilant. We're living in a dangerous time. And frankly, it's not just for us. People in the Muslim community, in communities of color, would probably tell you very similar things. People in the LGBTQ community would probably also tell you similar. I sent out an email this morning about participating in the Pride parade in Boston, and somebody wrote me back and said, "Whose side are you on?" Okay, so that's the kind of environment that we're living in.
That's actually a good lead-in to my next question, which is for the whole panel. In theory, rejecting anti-Semitism and racism shouldn't be a political issue. Shouldn't be a partisan issue, and yet in recent years, months, weeks, we've seen anti-Semitism and racism, for that matter, become, or perhaps it was already partisan, but it became even more partisan. You see politicians using it for all kinds of different purposes. I'm wondering, is there a way to fight anti-Semitism without getting tangled up in partisan politics? Is that possible? Or if it's not, or if it is, I'd be interested to hear how. And if that's not possible, is there a way to, as tactfully and gracefully as possible, navigate that partisanship and keeping an eye on something like fighting anti-Semitism? Anybody?
What do you want to answer?
Free for all.
Look, I don't think it should be a part of. I don't think any of us in this room can control, the partisanship, because politicians are politicians, and But I think that we need to make it a nonpartisan issue. I think it's a community issue. You know, racism is not a partisanship, it's a human issue. It's about treating people with dignity, with respect. It's about not dehumanizing people. And it's, you know, I believe also the government has an obligation to provide for our safety. And it doesn't matter what your, you know, gender, race, skin color is. We live in this country. This is a democratic country. And we have certain expectations of our leaders and our government. And, you know, we need to participate in that process. We must participate. I think it's just not an option. And we need to do everything we can to not make it a partisan issue.
Hatred and bigotry should never be partisan. If there's anti-Semitism, if there's hatred, there's bigotry, then it should be called out by everyone. Everyone. Not just one party or the other, but everyone. And to the extent that it is not being called out by certain leaders, they're part of the problem, okay? Because they're using it for political gain. And that's what they're doing. You know, the wedge issues, you know, the division is for political gain. So that is despicable. To use hatred and bigotry for political gain is despicable. And that's what's happening. Okay, make no mistake about it. In America, every day that's happening. People that do it didn't create the racists and the bigots. They didn't create them. They were here among us all along. But somehow along the way, they have been told that political correctness is no longer needed. You can be as hateful and bigoted as you always was, now that I'm around, or now that certain other people are around, and you can come out and be yourself. And that's ugly. But when you see incidents of hatred and bigotry, regardless if it's anti-Muslims, anti-Semitic, or anti-race, just watch your politicians. Watch who speaks out against it, but really watch who doesn't say anything and remains silent. Because they are the problem, not the solution.
I'll just add, I'm sure everyone is aware of this. In terms of anti-Semitism itself, we see it in different forms, but we see it across this political spectrum. We can see it on the far right, we can see it on the far left. You know, we see it, it doesn't express itself in the same way, but it finds a way to express itself. It's nonpartisan itself.
I had a question occur to me during the Robert's introduction, which I don't, you know, it struck me as a media question, but I think it affects us all because we all get our news from the media. And by the way, I have no problem saying that newspaper was way out of line publishing that. You know, you're not free to say everything in a newspaper. They are the ones who draw the boundaries between what is a reasonable debate and what isn't. And that, in my mind, if I were running that opinion page, is beyond the pale for reasonable debate. But the question for me remains, what advice do you have or thoughts do you have on how the media, you know, newspapers, TV news, radio, should treat an incident like a swastika stamped out in the snow or a swastika written on the wall? It strikes me, I'm torn on this myself. On one hand, you may be giving something more oxygen and attention than it deserves and amplifying the message and becoming kind of an unwilling, you know, helper. In another way, you're alerting the community to what's going on. Do any of you have thoughts on the best way to approach that?
No, I think exactly what you said. I think that it's important for the community to know that this is happening, but I think we should not in any way give media attention to the individuals who are the perpetrators, because that encourages them in some way. They get their 15 minutes of fame. So I think that if we don't give that oxygen, as you said, I think that that's better. But it is important for us to know that this is going on, because otherwise we might be naively, you know, uninformed.
It's an important dilemma that you cite, and we deal with it all the time. You know, 5 years ago, most schools did not take a lot of these kinds of hate incidents seriously. They were like defensive. They would cover it up, deal with it internally. You know, 5 years ago, middle schools didn't send out notices to the parents that there was a racial incident in the cafeteria, or there was, you know, somebody drew a swastika, you know, or targeted another student, and now they do. And we've actually encouraged schools to be transparent. And parents, communities should know what's going on. But it has this sort of double-edged sword of along with being open and transparent, media jumps all over this kind of stuff. But at the same time, I don't think we should ignore the little things, because the little things lead to the larger things. And something led to a guy in a pickup truck in Peabody last Saturday pulling over to launch a bunch of slurs at two Jews walking to synagogue. And I'm guessing that there was a pathway of stuff that led up to that allowed that to happen. And what scares me is what's next. And so I don't think we should. I don't think we should shy away from it. I think we need to use it as an opportunity to mobilize ourselves.
I have one more question for me, and then we're going to pivot for about 15 minutes to questions from the audience. My question is for Victoria. I know, Victoria, you work in interfaith cooperation on social justice issues, and I wanted to give you a chance to share any of the lessons you've learned from doing that work with this audience and this community today, if you had any thoughts that you can report from your work in the field.
Yeah. So we, as I mentioned, there are many initiatives that we're working on in the state, but I am always pleasantly surprised when I see faith leaders and people from different religious traditions coming together. Our group, as I mentioned, works specifically on poverty-related issues. For those of you who are unaware, Rhode Island actually has the highest poverty rate in New England. 1 in 5 children here is food insecure, and we have one of the highest rates of seniors who have food insecurity, amongst many other issues. But I really do see a shining light amongst our work. Last week we had a Faith in Action Advocacy Day at the State House where over 50 people from across the state came together. They did an advocacy 101 training, and then we went and spoke with our legislators specifically about the issue of housing discrimination, which impacts all Rhode Islanders. And that's just one event. Each year we hold several events that bring hundreds of people together and who are unified on these issues. And I feel very blessed that I can work with religious leaders and people of faith who are finding common ground to come together. And I think it's very important during this time that we find these commonalities and we can make our voice heard as a collective group. Because really what's happening in the United States especially is that we're becoming much more individualized. We're really losing that sense of community. I know when my grandparents were still alive, they belonged to a lot of community groups, whether it was a professional union or the Lions Club or Rotary. They knew their neighbors, they really met and shared meals together. And that's really going away, especially for my generation. I know everyone wants to blame millennials for everything, but a lot of that is going away, especially with social media and things like that. So I think working with communities of faith is such a wonderful opportunity because it's a place where people are coming together. It's one of the last places where you can speak to 50, 100, 200 people at once who are gathered together with some sort of shared moral understanding. And I think that's important for us to really think about, take pride in, and also find with other communities where those common points of intersection are. As I said in my introduction, I think it's really important for us to come together outside of incidents that are just responding to a traumatic event. You know, I am so happy when I hear that people are coming to help with cleaning up the cemetery and things like that after that incident, but we can't just come together in those times. We need to build those relationships so that the sense of community is fostered and is ongoing. If we don't do that, then we're simply just responding to evil and hatred. We're not actually working to make sure that we don't have incidents like that continue in the future.
So with the time we have left, I want to pivot to a few questions from the audience, and then as we wrap up, I want to give each of